Call the work session for December the 8th, 2020 to order at 4:30. And I will turn it over to Dr. Spence for the items of information.
First of all, we have a COVID-19 update. We have Dr. Lawton Davis here from Savannah with us tonight, and Dr. Whitehead and him are going to give us an update. And so feel free to ask any questions as he presents.
Good.
Good afternoon. I kind of jokingly said it's kind of going to be one of those moments like the M&Ms and Santa meeting up in the room and they realize that they exist because we always use his name all the time, but he's real. He's here. Anyway, I appreciate him making the trip to come. I just wanted to give a brief update to update the board. You probably heard toward the end of last week the CDC updated their guidance on quarantine, and then the Georgia Department of Health updated guidance for us on Friday. With return to school guidance, and we did a briefing with the principals yesterday morning to go through that new guidance to give them clarification on students being able to return at points before the end of that 14-day quarantine. CDC guidance continues to say that 14 days is what's recommended, but there are opportunities for students to come back after 7 days, and then another opportunity after 10 days that would be shorter than that original time frame of 14 days. And so we made that active for students that had been identified last week for quarantine, and so the schools that were involved with that made contact with parents about that as well yesterday. So if you have any questions about that. And then any questions you have for Dr. Davis about any of our procedures or protocols or things you're curious about with COVID.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I have a couple of things, but first of all, I want to say, Dr. Davis, thank you for your support through all of this. Obviously, we're not medical experts, most of us aren't, but we have one. So it was of great help to have some guidance as we decided how we were going to operate our schools this year. Mainly the questions that I'm hearing, and I know that it's not necessarily something that we can pinpoint for sure, but just a benchmark of when we can move from where we are now and how you determine that and the data you look at to get to that point.
Well, we look at, I follow several things, and what I like to say is, there is no perfect metric out there that tells you exactly what's going on or exactly what the risk is for transmission here in this room, in a school, or anywhere else. But we look at several things. And some of you I know are on the distribution list that I send out every day or at least 3 or 4 times a week that have different numbers. And you can also go to our website and see those same numbers that are updated every day. In general and briefly, we look at the 7-day rolling average of reported cases and sometimes even the 14-day rolling average. The state calls it a moving average, same thing. And again, if you look at the 7 and 14-day, you'd like to see the 7-day rolling average be lower than the 14-day rolling average. That means the most recent 7 days were better than the 7 days before that. That's kind of a, fairly obvious. We look at something that we call the 14-day community transmission index. If you look at the state website, it's called cases in the last 14 days per 100,000 people. So it is a prevalence rate. It's the number of people expressed as a rate per 100,000. The governor set that or picked that as his benchmark metric for allowing communities to adopt a mask policy. And if you are above 100, you have his blessings to adopt a mask policy. If you're below 100, we weren't supposed to do that. And currently, as of today, you're at about 191. And it has kind of come up since the end of October and kind of been on a little plateau here. Many of the counties around you are continuing to go up. Y'all have somewhat plateaued. We look at another measure that actually is the incidence of ongoing infection. And that takes the 7-day rolling average and converts it into a rate for 100,000 people. And this was put out by the Harvard Global Health Institute, and basically the lower it is, the better. What they found in schools in Europe back in the spring is if this metric was 1 or less, They did really well when they reopened, and obviously if it's 1 or less, you basically have no infection, so that's, you know, another duh moment. But if it's less than 10, that's pretty good. If it was between 10 and 25, meh. And if it was over 25, that was their red zone. And so we calculate that. Currently, as of this morning, you're at 13.6, so you'd be what we call the, you know, the yellow zone, so to speak. We look at hospitalizations, and that's just a rough measure of how many people are in the hospital at any given time. Hospitalizations generally lag behind a reported increase in cases, so what everybody nationwide is worried about now is with cases doing this now, you know, the hospitalizations are beginning to follow, and the deaths then follow another week or two after that. And we look at the percentage of tests that are positive. Of all the tests that are sent from Glynn County, what percentage is positive, and I don't have that on my little spreadsheet. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I think you're less than 10, but more than 5, which is in that, what we call a gray zone or yellow zone. So we look at all those things, and you also look at the trend. You don't just look at the raw number, but 190 on the way down would be better than 190 on the way up. And then, of course, so that's some of the data that we follow just to have a sense for whether we're doing okay, getting worse, getting, you know, whatever. We look at, listen to what the smart folks nationally tell us. And then we obviously look at scientific data too. You know, none of us knew anything about this virus before roughly February, you know. And so there are a lot of things that we still don't know. And I would just say in summary for the data that the evidence of, if anything, is much stronger that masks and social distancing actually work. And the evidence is much stronger that this virus spreads by aerosol, the aerosol route. You know, one of the arguments against that is, you know, TB has always been said to spread by big droplets. Well, that has been found in the last 6 weeks to be absolutely false. It spreads by aerosol and not by droplets. There's some experiments that are extremely difficult to do and, you know, conclusively prove. As a ridiculous example, I often tell people that are questioning some of the observational data that there are no double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled studies evaluating the effectiveness of the parachute. But numerous observations would say that if you find yourself between the airplane and the earth and you deploy a parachute properly, your outcome is likely to be better. Not perfect, but much better. Same with this. So one of the big concerns I know people have is singing and band, and one of the reasons we moved from Dublin to the coast was so my wife could participate with the Savannah Philharmonic singing. You know, that's in music. We love it. But yes, you can lessen the risk if you wear a mask, but still singing, you're aerosolizing. It's not perfect. You know, the mask is not perfect. You know, how far is far enough? We don't know. We're all looking for good data that shows that all of those protective things we do actually results in reduced, you know, infection and documentation of that. Again, observation would say that it's helping, and I believe that, but it's still considered a very high-risk endeavor. And so in general, until we can get everybody vaccinated, you know, outdoors is still better than indoors. Fewer people is better than a lot of people. Wearing a mask is better than no mask. And having fabulous ventilation systems in your buildings and using fresh air whenever you can is good. You know, and socially distance, the 3 W's, you know, wash your hands, wear a mask, watch your distance. I mean, but basically in a room like this, you know, 6 feet is not enough if you're going to be in here for any period of time. It's just not.
Okay, thank you.
That was a long answer, I'm sorry.
No, it was great.
So one thing you just kind of touched on, one thing I've kind of grappled with having, you know, children in the school system and having people, you know, you're fielding calls and Really in my opinion, I haven't gotten many calls about the mask issue. I mean, it was kind of a controversial thing to start with, but those have seemed to die down. Everybody's settled into wearing the mask, I think, and I don't think, for my part, I don't recommend we stop that anytime soon. I wouldn't recommend that at all, but it's difficult for laymen to understand the difference between singing and playing football or wrestling or playing basketball. And I mean, you're grunting and spitting and sweating on one another. And my son, although he plays sports, he also sings. And you're really, I mean, teachers notice and are noticing in him and other children a definite impact in not being able to take part in those activities. And whether Georgia High School Association, governs, the sports, and that's how we get around it and make sure it's okay. But I just can't for the life of me get my head around the difference.
I can't even. I think that how can you socially distance while you're wrestling? I played football in high school and college. How can you have a center and a guard that are not breathing all over each other, every play, and a guard and a tackle? I mean, look at what's happened in the NFL and in college teams, and
Sure.
So
Dr. Smith, I guess maybe, I don't know if we need to look backwards necessarily, but as we move forward, I mean, how do we come to the conclusion that we couldn't sing, but we could, do everything else normally we've been doing, I guess is what I'm saying. This question I have, and I'm in favor of, continuing the mask policy and distancing as much as we can, but returning back to as normal as we can next semester. And I don't really know that I understand who governs that. I think my personal opinion is that this board does, but I don't really know that. So.
Currently, I have two concerns medically. Number one is our numbers are going up. I don't know what yours are showing, but today we have 26 at the hospital, 15 in the ICUs right now. And that number is up from last week, which is up from the week before. The lowest I saw it, I think, was 16 or 17, and maybe 8. That's where it peaked, and now it's headed back up, and I don't see it coming down currently. What I'm also concerned about is I also haven't seen anybody with the flu. I don't know what reports you're getting, but so far we've had nobody reported with the flu, so that part hadn't even hit, and the hospital is full right now. And throughput has decreased significantly, and we're holding in the ECCs. So.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the hospitalization. You had an increase in cases, and a week or so later the hospitalizations go up, and another week or so the deaths are going to go up. The new cases have sort of plateaued here. Your hospitalizations will probably continue to go up. Let me make one comment on the flu. In the southern hemisphere, in those countries that have robust public health systems, I don't mean the Department of Public Health, but good medical, community, countrywide systems. They were, that's South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina. They were doing all the things that we're doing to prevent COVID. And they absolutely knocked the socks off of influenza. They almost have had no flu season. In fact, a few people have even hypothesized that a couple of strains of flu may disappear because they haven't been able to replicate. And the reason for that is that the same things we're doing for COVID are exactly what we ought to do for flu, except flu is not as contagious as COVID. And so, I'm hoping we don't have flu. Everybody get a flu shot, everybody keep doing what you're doing, but I can't imagine that we want flu and COVID at the same time. So I appreciate your comments, and I absolutely agree with them.
I have putting you on the spot just a little. What's your speculation of where we're on the backside of the peak, and we're actually going to look when you get the vaccines in? I know that takes like 15 days or 14, whatever it is, to actually take. Some people are curious if they're going to be contagious, and there's a lot in that circle still going on because it is so new. Where do you see us being able to be at green where we can take our masks off and all be in the same room? Do you have a guess? When I have a guess, I'm just curious if it's in the same neighborhood.
Time-wise?
Mm-hmm. School-wise?
Well, I think a lot depends on how many people are willing to take the vaccine. in addition to what the supply really is, you know, we're still struggling with that. If all of the vaccines in the pipeline come on board, the numbers I hear being kicked about is that to truly have herd immunity, we would need, you know, at least 70, but probably 80 to 85% of the people to be immune and vaccinated. So I realistically don't see that population-wide, you know, until spring or summer. I think late spring is a very optimistic guess. You know, these initial vaccines are not even going to be administered to anybody 18 or under for the time being, until it's determined to be safe. So,
Well, if you ever are in one of the meetings, if you would voice an opinion for me, I'd appreciate it. And it is, don't give it all to the frontline workers. Because if this has significant events to everybody, the people who are actually there that are helping you are the ones that are going to be negatively affected. When I heard that, I'm like, that is just like the worst idea ever.
well, I think the current 1A group is
Nursing
healthcare
homes.
providers and the residents of long-term care facilities and their providers. 1B is going to include 65 and over with, you know, comorbidities and their care providers. So, you know, that's among others, but they're going to be in there early, so.
Well, I do appreciate you coming and listening to us and
You're welcome.
sharing your opinions because they hear me, but they're used to me. So, no offense. That's just John.
Are we gonna change the way that we look at symptoms at all? I know early on we had some real issues with, you know, a first grader has a stomach ache, you know, and they go home for 14 days, and it's, you know, these are typical things that happen to children and happen every day. But we were quarantining a lot of people, and still are, you know, based on contact, I guess. But have we changed that, Dr. Whitehead, at all about how we look at a sniffle or seasonal allergies versus, you know, quarantining because you might have COVID?
I think part of, yes and no. We're still using the symptom list, but if it's a known issue with a child, you know, that they have ongoing seasonal
Sure.
allergies, unless something new emerges for that student, then we're just monitoring that and making the parents aware. But if it's a new symptom that emerges for a staff member or a student, then we're still going with a 10-day isolation unless they test negative and have seen a medical provider and they have no known exposure.
Do we have any idea, or do you have any numbers as far as the quarantine rate, or the amount of people that's been quarantined that have actually come down with COVID, that were close to the people that actually had COVID or reported? Do we have any numbers on the school systems?
Yes. But my super duper secure computer turns off too often, too quickly. I don't have everything you want to know, but we are trying to track that, and there have been, we had 240 cases in the ones that were on quarantine. We've had 25 of those people become presumptive positives.
And how many people were?
I don't have that
Yeah.
number, but we do see some of that, and we probably undersee it because, you know, people have learned to game the system. I hate to say that, but, you know, they've learned to not say certain things or not admit certain things.
Right.
But we are doing our best to track that as we can. And I did not ask in full for that report, but I actually can get it and send it to our Whitehead. She can share it with you.
Okay, great. So 240 total cases, though, since we started this year, is how many
Right.
cases that we've had that's actually come into the school system, or that we've
Right.
had?
So
And
that's about,
another problem we have with that is the people who go home on quarantine and then become symptomatic and are therefore a presumptive positive, they don't always go get tested.
Right.
So, you know, they can just still wait until they're timed out and their symptoms have improved and come back without, you know, going and being tested. And again, a lot of them will try to hide the fact that they had any symptoms anyway.
So in the numbers that you were mentioning, if I understand it right, 240 and 25, you think, could be presumptive positive from direct exposure, so about 10%? Is that what we're?
Well, no, there would be more people who've been quarantined. So it's a lower percentage than that. It's not a real high percentage of the people that
250 had COVID.
Right.
But we don't.
But then we
he said he doesn't
quarantined, I
have
don't know how
the
many
exact
people in
number of how many
quarantine total.
Geez, we've probably quarantined over 1,000.
Probably, yeah.
So it's 1,000,
Right.
it's 25 out of 1,000.
But I thought he was saying 25 was presumptive positive.
Well, 25 out of that 1,000 or so, however many it is you quarantine, that we know of have turned.
And that came from the 240 cases.
Right, of the 240 cases resulted in 1,000 or so people having to go home to quarantine. And of those people that went home to quarantine, 25 have become presumptive positives.
4%.
That's about right. I haven't looked at it lately, but I had looked at it a month or so ago. That's about what you were running, is 3 or 4%.
Yeah. Now, in your 8-district region, are you seeing varying protocols among
Yes.
the districts? And where do you see success versus failure in the types of protocol that they have?
The schools that are the most rigorous in following what you all are doing, certainly on a percentage basis, fare much better. We have one system that is notoriously, shall we say, a little cavalier, and proportionally they have much higher rates in their students, in their faculty, and particularly in their athletes. I mean, there's a noticeable difference. And there are, I mean, we've got a few systems that are really, and I put you all right up at the top as far as, you know, what you've been doing from a public health standpoint. I know it's not necessarily easy and you take flack for it, but we've got 3 or 4, probably 4 that are really rigid and doing what I call doing a great job. And then we've got 2 or 3 that are, and we've got 1 or 2 that are, I would like to go and speak with.
Correct. Okay. So what we would expect to see, I guess, is, you know, more lax, more cases,
Yes.
more strict, less cases.
Yes.
Dr. Davis, have you seen a reoccurrence rate at all? Say somebody gets it.
You know, that's a really, really good question. There have been a few cases reported in the literature that they have documented are reinfections. It doesn't seem to be very common. We've had a couple of our own employees who were symptomatic, tested positive, went home, got well, came back to work, you know, tested negative 2 or 3 times, and then a month, 6 weeks later, got sick again and had it again. Now, were they sort of lingering on, or I don't know. The only way you can really document that it is a new infection is if you were in a place where you could have the initial specimen and sequence it, and then when the person gets sick again, get another specimen and sequence it and see that, you know, it's the same or it's a different strain or, you know, whatever. But, yeah, that's one of the big unknowns.
So even though somebody, say a student, had already contracted it, and then they're around somebody later, they still would need to be quarantined?
Well, not if it's within 90 days. We're sure enough that, you know, 99% of people, 99+% of people develop immunity that lasts at least 3 months. It looks like it's lasting 6 or 7 or 8 months.
Okay.
But the guidelines at the moment are if you had a documented case, you were re-exposed, you have a known re-exposure, if your case was less than 90 days before, you don't have to quarantine. Because we assume that you are immune. Likewise, when the vaccine comes out, back to some questions, if you had it last week and you were a healthcare provider and were up for a shot, I would probably say, yes, we're gonna give you the shot, but why don't you hold off and let us give it to this guy, since we think you're immune and we know he's not. So,
Right. Thank you.
I'm older too.
I want to add on to the question that Mr. Hosey mentioned about band and chorus. And so, you know, you informed us that it was not a good idea to sing and to play instruments inside.
right.
Or some of the systems that you're seeing with higher numbers or medium numbers or lower numbers, they're telling us that they're having chorus and they're telling us that they're playing inside. How's that impacting the numbers?
I actually don't know the answer to that, but I'll know by the end of tomorrow
Okay.
and let you know.
That's what we're running into as board members and as a superintendent, is our course teachers and our band teachers are saying, well, this county's doing it, this county's doing it, y'all are not doing it. You know, why can't we do it? And the same thing with wrestling and football and basketball. I understand that.
But yeah, in my opinion, Dr. Smith, I mean, it's not even about what other counties are doing. I just can't wrap my head around it. You can't convince me that doing all the things I said on the football field, and I'm not a doctor, you know, but you just can't convince me that's any better than singing in a classroom. You know, there's an issue of fairness and other things here. We've essentially penalized a certain group of children, you know, over the past however many months. Penalized everybody. It's not nobody's fault, of course, but I just don't understand how, and no one recommended we not play football or not wrestle or not play volleyball or not play basketball or anything else. And this is not me, and y'all know as well as anybody that I'm more pro athletics than just about anybody else. I think it's a very important part of what we do, but so are the arts. And I can't understand why we continue to do that. But maybe we can talk about it some more and see how we can address it.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Davis or Ms. White or Dr. Whitehead?
Do we know? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Good.
Of the 252 cases that we've had, positive cases, and that's students and staff, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't.
From the student, I know we've had a couple of, well, I know of one staff member that was hospitalized, but that was early on, I think. But have we had any, do we track student hospitalizations? Do we know, has anybody been hospitalized based on any of our positives that we know of?
I'm not aware of any student hospitalizations at this point.
I'm not either.
We have had several staff members.
Okay, right, okay, thank you.
Ms. Mansell?
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here, Doctor. I wanted to ask you real quick. Do you foresee, I know they just decided to change the contact days or the quarantine days for contact. Do you foresee that going back up with the trend ticking back up, or are you confident that we could stay at the 7 to 10 instead of the 14?
I think there's reasonably good data behind it. Quite honestly, I think some of it is, political. But I think there's also pretty good data behind it as well. And if you use the 7 or 10 day option instead of the 14-day option, there's a 4 or 5% increase in risk of transmission. Somebody completes 5 full days of quarantine and goes in day 6 and has a negative test, and they get it back on day 7. When they complete day 7, they can come back to school on day 8. There's about a 4 or 5% increased likelihood of that person being able to transmit it versus somebody that waited full 14 days. And so the hope is amongst the bright guys and gals up there is that by shortening the period, the penalty period, time out in the penalty box, that it'll make people be more compliant with it, and also make people be more willing to name others that they know they may have exposed or been in close contact with. And so the hope is that the net effect of more compliance and better contact tracing will outweigh the 4 or 5% increase in risk of still being able to transmit it. That's
I was going to say, I agree with what you're saying, because I know that when we quarantine students for 14 days, you'll see the students out in the general population in the community. And so now they're out with the whole community and not in the school with just the school community. And you know, I don't know data on that, but it seems like they're out there on quarantine and potentially picking it up from other sources or potentially giving it to other sources.
Yes, and you guys are not, you're struggling with the same thing that a lot of other people have been, and we have been, and, you know, you were saying the recommendations for certain things. Let me just say as carefully as I can, there are certain things that we in public health have been told that we can't do or say, or we've been told not to do or say. So our official position is to provide information and, you know, science-based evidence, but we don't tell Dr. Spence and Dr. Whitehead and this board what to do. And if you can read between the lines, if you need to read between the lines, you know, their pay grades above mine, so.
I mean, I personally was a little surprised that the days changed, because you've been hearing for a while now, we're spiking. So, you know, all of a sudden it's counterintuitive that, like, okay, we're gonna, you know, and you mentioned politics, and it's a shame that's part of it, and, you know, that's the frustrating piece of it, because, I mean, Mr. McDonald just got out of his mouth how things are spiking at the hospital, but that's okay, just do it 7 days. But we've been doing 14 this whole time. It just doesn't make any sense to the lay person that's out there having to deal with,
It
you know, with
doesn't
what's
make
going
any
on.
sense to some of us either.
I understand, and I do appreciate you being here.
Trying to make
You
a
know,
living and doing the best I can.
us too.
Oh, your explanation of that was pretty good. I liked it. I thought it made numerical sense. Decrease the days, have more people comply, and at a net loss of 4% versus a higher percent of people who weren't compliant. So I think although it looks funny, it's, you know, statistically correct. I like that explanation. Now you help me explain it. I need to.
I'm gonna stick with it's just political.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Davis? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for being here.
I would like to thank you. I'm serious when I say I put you guys right up here at the top. Y'all have done a great job. I know Dr. Whitehead is probably tired of having to talk to me, but I appreciate it, and the open lines of communication. And y'all raise good questions also. A lot of times what y'all do, I kind of surreptitiously steal and send out to some other people and say, this is the way you ought to do it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
With that said, it's still on COVID. We talked earlier in the school year mandating masks through first semester. That ends in a few days. I would say that I'm going to continue to mandate masks in the school system until the next work session, and then we would just go work session to work session, unless someone has a problem with that. Okay. So we'll mandate masks until the January the 7th or 8th work session. Next up, 1 week from today, we will have board training from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Skipper's. Richard Smith will come from
Thank
first.
you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Richard Smith will come from First District RESA. It will mainly be focused on human resources. And we'll talk about human resources from an overview for the state, human resources for Glynn County, and then what it's going to look like in the future. So it'll be a training, like instead of going to GSBA, we'll do our training here. Okay? And that'll be a 6-hour training. Tomorrow, if you want to pull that up real fast, Chris, we'll have a new board member training for Ms. Gibbons. And you can see the schedule today. We did a 30-minute training with the organizational chart and staff introductions before our work session. You can see the times that'll be. If you want to, you're certainly welcome to come if you want to come by and be a part of that. But we'll do it here in the boardroom. Any questions there? No. Next up, Ms. Lewis and Dr. Whitehead again with curriculum and instruction update. Say.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Evening.
All right, you are fast. We're just just going to give you an update of where we are with some curriculum instruction. And first, I was going to just share with you some numbers with the EOCs coming up. American Lit, for Glynn Academy, we have approximately 198 students. Brunswick High, we have 171 take the EOC. Glynn Academy in Biology, we have 190. And at Brunswick High, we have 229. And then for Algebra 1 at Brunswick High, we have Algebra 1, we have 73. And at Glynn Academy, their algebra classes are year-long, so they won't be testing until May. And another little tidbit we wanted to share with you, that was the EOCs for our high school, but we wanted to make sure, and I think you already know this, but we wanted to reiterate that regardless of COVID, we're still working very diligently with our students to where they are and meeting their needs. We know that a lot of children are lacking due to COVID and the situations we are, but that doesn't mean we use that as an excuse or a crutch. So I think you remember at the beginning of the year, we gave a baseline data to all our schools and all our students so we could see where they were. And in January, we're going to re-give the reading inventory to our elementary, middle, and high to see where our students are in reading. IXL will continue to be used in our schools, but it won't be a benchmark per se for the district. It will be used on an individual basis at each school to be a snapshot in time to see where our students are in math. And of course, in elementary, we're encouraging our elementary schools to use the Eureka in middle module test as well as the end of module test so they can compare that. In elementary, we're continuing using our running records to see where students are and constantly pushing our students in literacy. And I thank you in advance for some of you guys for already stepping up and doing some recorded reading. We have lots of people in our community that's stepping up to do that as well. Children will read as well as they hear other people read, so we need good models. So if you haven't signed up yet, it's not too late. You get to pick your book or we provide a book for you. And that is really important for our students, more so than ever. And it's not just our Glynn County students. We're going to open up this library to Head Start and other private daycares in our community because we want to be seen as we're building literacy as a community, not just in our schools. So the sooner we start with our children, the better. Also wanted you to know that Dr. Spence and I, we talked about and organized our mid-year conferences with our principals. And that's another way of checking of where our students are. We're checking the MTSS process, which I know you are aware of. That's the multi-tier support system for our students. And that's where each school has the opportunity to look at all the struggling students in their school to see where they are and be very prescriptive of what they need. We're also looking at their grades. And instead of doing just a grade distribution list to see how many A's or B's or C's are in a classroom, we are narrowing it down now to see exactly what pieces are being graded. And that's a huge piece. And I think our teachers are working extremely hard. And we just didn't want you to think that we're just twiddling our thumbs and blaming it on COVID or being nonchalant. It's more than ever now, we're focusing on individual children and where they are and meeting their needs. Any questions?
How much do the EOCs count towards the grade?
I think that has not been determined yet.
Officially, it has not been determined.
I know it's all over the place.
Yeah. Dr. Spence has been working with the high school principals on how to handle that through this semester. I think the intent, regardless of what level it is not to have it harm a student in any way. So.
We are telling parents, though, that your child still can be retained. I mean, we're having to really raise that level of concern with our parents that even if you do choose to continue to do virtual, and I think Dr. Whitehead's going to be talking more about that and the stipulations that we put on that, but, you know, it's not going to be an excuse just because. And if you choose virtual, the expectations are still high. Okay.
And that is what I was just going to give you an update on where we currently stand for planning for second semester for virtual, where we had hovered around 30% of students staying home. Our numbers now are looking like we're going to have about 10% in second semester. And I'm sure you were aware from what was posted on the websites to indicate that we've notified families of students that were determined academically ineligible for virtual because of lack of progress and concern over whether they could continue to make progress for promotion or to earn credits. And so those parents have been notified in those situations. And should there be a medical hardship, we are taking that into consideration, so we're not being insensitive to that while we still have a pandemic in play. But we're looking right now, middle schools in total are looking under 200 students would remain virtual. Elementary is just above 500 at this point in time, and high school is around 400 for virtual. And those are significantly lower numbers than what we've had. And so I'm just working through that with the schools and determining how we'll staff and maintain learning for those students through second semester.
How are they, what's the acceptance of the parents? What did you have to call and say your kid has to come back because they're not moving forward? How has that been going? Do we have any?
I would say it's probably been mixed. You know, we have some, and as part of the application to declare a hardship, we are making sure that parents do have that acknowledgement, as Mrs. Lewis said, that if you're choosing the hardship as your driving force, then you have to understand they've got to make progress, or we're just not automatically moving students forward. Because that was a choice that was made that prohibited us from necessarily being able to do all the things we could do if they were in school, with supervision and direct instruction that we would have in place at school. And so the majority have understood, I think, and even a lot of our elementary schools have been able to go ahead and start processing students back in now for these last few weeks that we've had between Thanksgiving and Christmas to get students reacclimated to school so they'll be ready to hit the ground running in January. So it's been mixed.
And I guess, do we have, I mean, what's our power play as far as when they say no, we're not coming back? I mean, what are we going to do?
If they don't have, if they don't meet the requirements of getting a doctor's note and the steps we've made, we don't have to offer it. So, I mean, we're offering an education here in the building.
But what I'm saying is if they say we're not coming back because it's unsafe, but yet we're saying you got to come back because you're not getting anything done, I guess we just don't, they fail? Is that how it's going to be?
Yeah, when you're talking about students who are doing nothing.
Right.
That we're getting nothing out of. And so the only way we're going to get something out of is to bring them into the building.
I completely agree.
And
I'm just
yeah.
trying to figure out.
We're gonna hold our ground.
Right.
Because you're talking about the life of a child. You're talking about people who don't realize what's gonna happen 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 years down the line as a result of the last 6, 12 months.
Right.
And it's our job as educators to hold the line at that point in time.
And I agree completely, and I'm glad we're holding people accountable. That's one of the things I said before we ever got started on this next go-around in the fall of the virtual. But I was just wondering what, is there a legal ramification that, they can, because you're going to have somebody that's going to push it,
Yeah.
and say that I'm not coming back because it's unsafe.
Right.
But
If they're under
yet, 16,
we can get them for truancy, yes.
okay.
And I'm sure that their retention appeal
Yeah.
may look very different, but we'll support the school when they come down here.
Good.
In most instances right now, the principals are being able to talk to the parents and saying, look, this is what little Johnny's doing. Little Johnny needs to be in school because little Johnny's making no progress. And in most instances, we're seeing that the parents are agreeing and bringing them back.
Good. Well, I hope that's the case. Hope it stays that way.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Simon.
Boudreau, facilities update.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
All right. We'll get kicked off with Glynn Academy. First on the list is the science building, and it's complete, and we'll probably be taking it off the list for next time. It's done, did very well. Additional parking, we're still in a kind of a holding pattern, waiting on some closings to move forward with any more parking at GA. Haven't heard anything on that yet. Physical education addition, the auxiliary gym, we're kind of in a holding pattern on that too until we can get basketball season over. The first stage of that is the demo, which takes away all the heat and air. So we've kind of worked backwards from when basketball season is over to be able to schedule that demolition. Altama Elementary School, we start tomorrow with weekly meetings with the contractor in an effort to try to figure out where he is and where he's going. We're going to try to help him as much as we can, and hopefully with the architect and me guiding him a little bit, maybe he can get things moving a little bit faster. But I'll know more tomorrow. Center for the Arts, we had a good meeting last week that probably gave us some avenues to have a possible MOU. Sounded pretty promising, it just depends on what we can do legally and what we can't. But
We had a couple breakthroughs, I would call it that, and we have some ideas that are being kicked around that could make this thing happen. And the ball's a little bit in their court. They're checking with their attorneys to see how things would work. And actually, for the first time in a few months, there's a little optimism. So as things develop, we'll let you know. But right now, they have to get some clearance from state attorneys. But would you agree there's some optimism?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We also, I began talks with the Methodist Church about, they finished their parking lot out there, and about maybe doing the same agreement we had in the past. I started talking about that today with from Glynn County.
okay. Before we do the good report, I'd like to jump down to my proposed action items that I'll be covering tonight, which is review of classroom and media center furniture for new Altama. Is that the office quote first there, Chris? That's fine. G, proposed action item G. And I can't read it. There we go. This would be the recommendation to award to J2 Cabinetry and Trim. This is for our media center furniture, our teacher desks, and our office furniture. We've been using this company since, 2007. Exclusively to do all this work. They are a sole source vendor, and that's the recommendation we bring forward. The next would be for classroom furniture. This is student desks, computer tables, all the regular classroom furniture. And this went out under state contract to Georgia Specialty Equipment Company. And they've been earning this award for the last 5 or 6 years or so. That would be in the amount of $264,115.09. And go back to the other one, Chris. I don't think I read the amount on that. Is that it right there?
Yeah.
For $133,741.51. All righty. Outdoor lighting for Altama Elementary School. We received bids for the outdoor lighting fixtures for Altama. This was the first time we've not been able to work something out with Georgia Power to do this. So we are going to purchase the fixtures and install them ourselves. The fixtures would be awarded to Wind Supply in the amount of $32,414.37. Georgia Power just couldn't quite make it work for us. And the last item is Cafeteria Furnishings. This was by the request of Ms. Daniel and the principal at Altama. They picked out what they wanted, and statewide contract again for $55,772.84.
Out of curiosity, what happens to the furniture that's in the current location?
Well, if it's in decent shape, we have an opportunity to put it on surplus and let other districts come get it. If it's not in good shape, we usually just scrap it out, get scrap money for it. And what we can't use, we throw away. It's a shame because a lot of it's in decent shape, but trying to handle furniture 3 and 4 times, it's just the manpower is just you know, it's just not feasible to handle it so much, and we don't have anywhere to store it. So it either can get sold as surplus, and the good thing about Altama is that we can leave it there and actually use it as a storage area to, you know, let people come through and have some time to do that. We haven't had that opportunity in a while to to do that, but it's a good option. Plus, we need to discuss how we want to reuse Altama. There may be some options for East Bloss 4 that would let us use Altama for a little while for certain things. I'm thinking maybe Glendale, be able to get out of Glendale while we redo it. You know, just things we can talk about. Just be thinking about that in the future. So, all right. Well, Kevin, I'll turn it over to you for the good report.
Not a problem. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody should have a copy of our summary pages in front of you. Please let me know if you don't. But starting on page 1 here, we've got all of Splosh 2, 5 years after it's been completed. Finally all completed at this point in stage, and we expect to be closing out anything on any future reports from Splosh 2 at this point in time. There's some state receipts still to come in related to that, related to Guerrero Chatilla, but we expect those to roll in the future months to wrap up. Al already covered off on several things related to the current contractor and completion of some parking areas. You move on to page 2, you can see that we've received final payment on the science building work, and we'll move those into the completed categories in the future. As Al already mentioned, some of the other initiatives in phase 13 and 14 and Glenn Academy will be addressed in the coming year in terms of activities. Move on to page 3, what everybody wants to know. We had another previously good month, 481,000 over budget, which is a budget of 1.7 for total collections of 2.097845. Again, we're tracking very, very well on our overall projection for the program with 2 months to collect. So the month of December and January will close out Splosh 3 from a collections period point of view. In February of 2021, we'll start Splosh 4. So the receipts are doing very, very well. And then the final page here, summary, just shows you where we are compared to the year before. And we are, as you can see, we're on a consistent track, December being one of the normally lower months, and as well as November in a calendar year, but we're still doing well and outpacing previous year's collections. Any questions for anybody? We'll be moving with Scott and others in terms of planning activities in January and February for East Splosh 4, so we can be well prepared to continue the program in February when they start. Thank you guys. Have a very good holiday.
Hey, Al.
Thank you.
Just real quick, I mean, how far behind, I'm sorry that's the last meeting, about how far behind are we on Altama? What's,
My guess is 2 months.
real?
Yeah.
Let me guess, rain.
I mean, but even in 2 months, there's a possibility. My plan was to try to move in the last 2 weeks of school, last 2 weeks of May. So that's still in the window. So hopefully with our weekly meetings, we'll be able to have a little better gauge, because all this furniture we're ordering, you know, I have to tell them when to deliver it.
Right.
So it gets a little tricky, but hopefully they'll pick up the pace. Like I said, I'm counting on good subs to kind of pull us through, but they're a little bit lost right now. I hate to say it.
Would you think having him speak to us would help out?
Honestly, no. No, sir.
I believe what came up last meeting, I think you were not here, was I think that the metal, I believe you were saying, that's what they were saying was the issue, was getting the metal manufactured and shipped was the problem, right? Or that's what kind of,
That's what
they were saying.
That's what put them behind. And then, you know, there were some issues with paying their subs. I mean, when Mr. McDonald died, the son picked up the pace, and he missed a month of pay requests. So when the subs don't get paid, they don't come to work. So we're working on that. We've gotten that straightened out. So hopefully we'll see some positive action here in the next month or so. But I'll keep you up to date. No sugarcoating it. It doesn't look really good right now. So hopefully we'll pull it out.
Andy, where do we stand, and when could we If we need to cut bait, when can we do that, or can we?
Well,
What constitutes breach of contract, I guess is what
If we
I'm.
breach the contract, then that'll set us back.
Yeah, you'll lose a year.
Yeah, I mean, it would be not something I could recommend, I don't think you would. We got a problem with that company, but hopefully you're good
I mean, I think
we also have, by the way, we're not thrilled with the Water Sewer Authority. We're still negotiating, but that's not as bad as in the past. We're not gonna have to go to court, but we're trying to work that out. They've set us back a couple months maybe.
We're trying to work it out. I'm waiting to hear from next day or two. I should have hopefully something that cuts a lot of that. I made a proposal to them to maybe do it a little differently, and they're gonna.
We just also can't afford to have them push and have subs that don't know what they're doing, have shoddy work and deal with it for the next however many years. You know what I'm saying? So, I understand we don't want to lose a year, but we also want the work to be done right and on time and by qualified
That's the thing
subs.
about the subs. I mean, it's a great group of subs. I mean, they're really good, but they need to be paid, and they're getting paid again. So that's a step in the right direction.
We do not have a default in the contract or we can't ding them because it's not in the contract as far as finding them at fault and taking money away, because it's not in the contract. But Al's, they're doing the best they can, but we're behind on that project.
But we're gonna do
No
everything.
sugarcoating.
Nope. We'll do everything we can to get it back on track.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right. Next up, Ms. Preston, with some proposed action items.
Okay. First up, we have the October financial report. We had two amendments to the general fund budget. First one being $2,000 for the GSBA safety grant that we got. And the second one is, when we went through the budget process and the CARES Act money came out for COVID and all that, back then, I didn't know if it was going to come through the general fund or for special revenue funds. So at the time, when we adopted the budget, I worked it into the general fund budget. But instead, it has to be treated as a special revenue fund. So I'm decreasing the revenues in the general fund and decreasing the expenses in the general fund, because what I had to do was, for 1 month during this school year, I picked October, and I had my programmer recode expenditures from the general fund to the special revenue fund. So it affects the budgeted expenditures in the general fund. So basically, we're just moving the revenue and expenses from the general fund into the special revenue fund. So it shows up as a budget amendment for the general fund. The year-to-date expenses represent 28.1% of the budget. Local tax receipts for October are $16 million. Year-to-date expenses represent 26.7%, and we're 33% through the year. So again, you know, we've got vacant positions. I asked HR about that this week. I think we have about 7 teaching and 12 paras, and obviously a boatload of bus drivers. So we're saving money again this year. We're lagging behind where we should be in expenditures. My information on East West is behind what you just heard. Sales tax for October in the amount of $2.1 million, which was 22% higher than last October. So this October to last October, we collect 22% more. And the year-to-date collections are 22% higher from this time last year to this year. And a big chunk of that is that audit, you know, that we talked about. We got about $940,000 when they audited sales tax for the last, from 2015 to 19. So good news, unexpected revenue. So that's the financial report for October. Is there any questions?
I have a general question. So we're almost halfway through the school year. Are there any categories that are significantly ahead of budget position that we need to be concerned about? Especially, I know we were talking about with COVID, we might.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. We're looking very good on the budget right now.
The other thing I had is the stipend. I went back and ran numbers for $600 for everybody that y'all had talked about at the board meeting. And the cost of that is $1,370,000. And what we were planning on doing is paying whoever's actively working at the beginning of January, that very first Friday that we're back to work. It's like January 5th, I think, something like that. If it gets approved, January 8th. And that's our proposed action item for tonight. The other thing I have is purchase of the Chromebooks. So we did an inventory to come up with what it would take to make sure we had a Chromebook available for every student in Glynn County. And we're using state contract with Dell. I cannot see the total amount of that. 2.6 million, I think. There you go. 2,606,462.90. And the curriculum folks wanted to do touchscreen for pre-K through kindergarten, and then 11-inch for 1 through 8, and we got the bigger ones for the high school students. And that is East Plus money, the technology money.
So that was gonna be one of my questions. Why do the touch screen just for the lower 2 grades, but they're
Because that's
thinking
what
about
curriculum-
first grade?
That's what curriculum
Yeah.
requested.
Okay.
When would these be delivered?
Oh, I don't know.
They're back ordered big time, right?
Yeah,
Maybe August?
we're wanting to get this
Right.
out as soon as possible.
I thought some of them said February though.
Maybe, we hope so. About the time the Altama's built.
No, we should get them, hopefully, January, February. The next thing I have is the security cameras for Altama. Is there a memo? Yeah. And Adapt to Solve is on statewide contract, and we've been using them for a while now because of their pricing. So that's East Plus 3. And then replacement school access control system for Altama. Thanks, can't see the crap. And Adapt to Solve again for that for statewide contract. And then the last thing I have is the good East West Oversight contract. And this for $750 for the term of this East West 4. And if you'll go down, I think it shows. Is there another page?
Yeah.
Is there another page that shows the previous?
No, we were paying like 1.25 million on the other ones, and then like 1.1 million.
They've gone down each East West, and this is the lowest.
And I
And
believe
our
we've
first
also
East
talked
West, we
about-
use them for like actual oversight on jobs,
Right.
remember that?
Yeah, there are two things that happened. They wanted to, what was it, like 878, and we came
we
back and
asked
said
them-
do it for 750.
Yeah,
They agreed, and then Kevin only comes once every quarter.
yeah.
But you'll still
Yeah,
send all the
They'll
information.
they'll send this to us, and we'll present it.
They used to come bi-weekly when we met, bi-weekly all of that, and it's just kind of, our main goal with them is cash flow monitoring and some planning, programming for build construction and stuff. They've, I think their services have been well worth it.
Any questions for Ms. Preston?
I got one. Can we go back to the Chromebooks? As
Yep.
far as the 6,891, it says that we determined that's what we would need to require all students to have
That is
access.
the difference of what we need. We already have 6,000 plus in inventory right now.
Good.
And that was the difference in what we needed to make sure every student would have one in their hands.
Just want to make sure that's for the record.
Yep.
So that way everybody knows that we're just not buying 6,000. We've got some already.
Now, let me clear something up now. When they come in, we're not gonna hand them to the students and say, go home.
Right, it's available.
It's available in case we need it, it's available if the teacher wanna use it that way. But we have to train our staff, we have to train our students how to use them appropriately. Because if we're not talking about being a one-to-one school system, because those are few and far between that have been successful.
This is all about access,
This
not
is all about making sure that every kid, at any point in time during the day, every kid could access a Chromebook. A lot of times we find ourselves in a situation where Miss Johnson in her English class wants to use the Chromebook set, and Miss Sams in the social studies class can't because Miss Johnson's using them. And so we want to make sure everyone has access. So.
Do we have the security, and I'm sure we do, the security and storage and that sort of thing, to double our Chromebooks?
We didn't get the quotes in time for the carts to put them in, so that'll be on the next board meeting, but they're not as in high demand, hard to get.
Yeah, we're gonna get the carts and put them,
We're gonna get
basically, say a
carts.
middle school, every homeroom would have a set of Chromebooks. A high school, every academic class would have.
And they all get inventoried,
Right.
you know.
Any questions? Thank you, Ms. Prescott. The last thing I have is, I think we talked a little bit about an MOU with McIntosh County for them to use GICA. And that document's in here. I've worked with Dr. Poulos back and forth, writing it. And have you read it yet, Mr. Lakin? Yes. And
We had discussed
yeah, right.
the parameters, and I've now read it.
Right, basically, we're guaranteeing them that they can use 10% of the population, that if they want to send 10% of, if we have 25 seats, they get 2.5. They're going to start with 10 kids in January, sending them to Glynn County. They're going to send them on a bus, taking classes, and then whatever the FTE cost is, they're going to send us a check for what they make off of the FTE for their student to come to GICA. So, and that's in the MOU. We've looked at the way to write the special ed stuff. Because some of the funding is more according to the type of student you have. And so whatever they would receive for that exact class, for that exact student, we would get that money at the end of the semester.
And there's language in there with regard to discipline issues and things like that.
Yeah, discipline, Mr. Jeppenhart would be in charge of discipline there, and we basically say this kid can't come back. And he would work with the principal of McIntosh County Academy, and they would decide what to do with the student back at McIntosh. We're not going to send them to Brother Kyle for ISS or anything. They would deal with it. And say a kid quit or a kid didn't, had to be suspended from there, and they had been in school for 2 months. Well, we're going to get that proportion of the FTE count, of the FTE dollars. I think it's a win-win for not only McIntosh County, but for the Glynn County school system and Southeast Georgia as a whole, because we're providing something for their students also.
Do we have room for them?
Absolutely. More than that.
And that was my concern, that we would not deprive any of our children of a seat in a class, and that's been
And
addressed.
the reason I use the 10% thing is I would hate for one of their kids to go through a pathway and get to the final class and we'll go, hey, you don't have room. So I didn't want to do that to them either. So I think we have a pretty good deal in place. This is not unique. This is not something that's unique. This happens all over the state of Georgia. Any questions on the MOU? That's all I have. Okay.
All right, so we hit D and E, I'm assuming. Guess we went over that.
No, there's nothing there.
Nothing there, you don't have anything?
Okay.
Good deal. Any other? I don't have any other. I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session. I'll give that to Reverend Bobbitt, and I'll second Mr. McDowell. All those in favor?
You go for
7-0.
I have a workers' comp
I'm sorry,
settlement, by the way.
land,
We don't
legal,
have any
personnel.
land, legal, and personnel, all three
Yeah.
of them.
Just making
Sorry
sure.
about that. Appreciate it. Land, legal, and personnel. All those in favor? It was unanimous, 7-0. At 5:39.
To return to open session. So moved by Reverend Violet, second by Ms. Sams. All those in favor? Unanimous. At 6:26. Make a motion to adjourn. I'll entertain a second.
Second.
Don't
I'm
forget.
gonna give that to Mr. Medalla. All those in favor?
Regular meeting.
All right. All those in favor at 6:27. We adjourn.